Okay, welcome guys. So by request, I'm going to be going over the process for modeling your character from scratch. Now, in this case, I, of course, took a shortcut and I'm using someone else's character art here. I'm going to use Guts like I've been modeling in class for the past couple weeks. It's worth noting that having a piece of art like this is really important. Right, what you want to make sure is what I'm doing here is Control R to show the rulers. And I'm just making sure, right, when I bring my character art in, that the different areas of the character line up from the front and side views. Um, this will greatly affect your modeling down the line, right? And if you haven't been accurate with your concept art, it can really affect um, how your model looks, right? And it's going to cause you a lot of headaches just because you're going to have to rework things and you're going to have to jump through a lot of extra hoops to get your model looking right and end up pushing vertices around, right? Which is kind of what we try to avoid. If we do all the planning ahead of time and kind of think through the process before we start and do a lot of this stuff on paper, we can avoid having to spend too much time reworking and fixing things in Maya. So this character, right? This character art was nicely laid out, so it makes my life a bit easy. But in order to get it into a fresh Maya scene, right, I still need to have the front and side views split up. I don't super need to worry about the back view. Um, except if I was going to get into modeling all of these little armor pieces and things later, but generally from what I can see, these pieces are pretty much symmetrical front and back, uh, and the sword I would model as a separate object, right? It's hidden anyway. The cape we can do through end cloth if we want to get into that. I'll try to do a demo on making a cape for those of you that have a caped character. That's pretty straightforward. So first thing I would want to do is to separate out my front and side views. I can select my character, hit C to crop him down, save the file down, right? Then come back to Photoshop, do the same thing for the side view, crop that, save that photo, and you're going to want to save it into your source images folder inside of your project. So here I have these and they're just two JPEG images. I don't really need to worry about cutting them out from the side, but that is something that you could possibly do. Or I mean, having them square. So once I'm in Maya, I have a new scene here. Right, space to enter quad view. I'm looking for my side and my front views. View, image plane, import image. Grab the front image. I like to move it above the grid here, and I'm going to size it up actually, because now that I've started working in Mudbox a little bit more, I see that they use quite large characters. Line the feet up to the grid. It's more this heel that matters than his toe. And then same thing in the side. Now, one mistake I already made though is I've sized it up first. So what I actually want to do is keep the scale the same when I import it. I could go back and fix this using the scale options over here, but it's worth noting that in Photoshop, right, the scale is already uniform between these two images. So by scaling it up, I would just have to scale the side view up the exact same amount. But doing it this way, it's going to make my life a little bit quicker. Once I have two images, right, the front and side view, typically what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for an area that I can compare the two And moving this sideways and back and forth will let me see, okay, does the bottom of the chin, for instance, line up? Seems like the bottom of the chin is a little bit wrong on this one, so I'll shift it upwards a tiny bit. Now, I noticed here when I checked the ruler in Photoshop that the top of the hair is not quite accurate, so I don't really want to use those points as a jumping off mark. But the bottom of the chin here was pretty accurate. Maybe the other part that I can use is here, the tip of the pauldrons on the shoulders. Alright, so in that case, could move the shoulders outwards, look for where that tip is, and make sure those are pretty accurate. So making sure that these front and side views are lined up is important. Also, right, it's going to matter if it's dead down the center, just because in your side view you won't be able to see the grid if it's on the right side of the grid. So I'm just going to shift over side view ever so slightly. The front view is already good. So here I can scale these up together since they are matching, right? But if I had scaled one up before the other, all I would need to do is check the scale value over here and paste that in to its side view. Right. So then I'm going to have the side view cut right down kind of the center of that character's legs. In case we're using Guts from Berserk while he is in his prime, doesn't have any injuries. Maybe I can bust him up later once I've got the model done. Alright, so other house cleaning that I could do at this point if I wanted to, that's worth noting, is that if I find that, say, the side view is going to be in my way, I always have the option here. Oops, I'm not in the classic workspace, and I'm under the animation tab, so stuff wasn't showing. So if I select one of these image planes, I can also change in the attribute editor on the right whether I can see that side plane from just the side view, right, or in every single viewport. So in my case, I'm going to be working mainly using the front view, and then the side view I will be adjusting after the fact. The top view I'm not really going to use too much. So to get started with the character, I like to start in the dead center. This gives us kind of a nice round area to work with. And like I demoed in class, I'll typically work with a low poly cylinder. So creating a cylinder primitive, turning off subdivision caps so that I have a nice clean top, and then dialing down the subdivision axis. For this part, it's going to be up to you. I like to work with an 8-sided cylinder just because it is split cleanly both ways here and there. It gives me some geometry, but not too much. I'm going to move the cylinder over to the center of my character, right at the belt. Switch to the scale tool and scale this out so that it is as wide as his midsection here. Now, I do want to keep this straight down the center, so I don't want to get too distracted with nudging things over and being artistic just yet. I'm going to treat this as if it was perfectly symmetrical, even though the artist has taken a few liberties there. Another thing I typically do at this stage is go from my shading mode, turn on X-ray. That will make the material more ghostly. If you find that this material is too see-through for your needs, right? If it's just like kind of distracting or a little bit hard to see maybe on your screen. Another thing you can do is just to open the Hypershade editor, and this material is assigned the default Lambert. Typically I won't mess with the default one. I'll just go ahead, make a new Lambert, assign that to my selection. It's the same color right now, right? But then I can change the transparency on here to suit my needs, right? If I want it to be just a little bit transparent, 50% or more is about where X-ray sits, or if you want it to be really transparent, right? So this way you can adjust it in the Hypershade, or even in the attribute editor here directly. You can always just like shift things over ever so slightly to make them more visible or less visible. All right. So what we're going to do with this cylinder is, I guess I'd treat it kind of like this character's belt. I do like to keep a center line going down this character to make them perfectly symmetrical. It might even be worth splitting this cylinder at this stage, but let's just pause this and make sure that everything is good on the video before we continue on with the modeling. Alrighty, so with our belt in place, now I'm going to start extruding down the character. Some people like to work in quad view for this and keep an eye on both views. Like for example here, right? Before I start extruding, I should really fix the side view. So notice I'm only really going to concentrate on extruding in one direction at a time. Since I kind of like having this split down the middle here, maybe I'm going to move the side view back a little bit so that it's more centered. And then scale it out evenly. That way I can keep my split right along the plane and not have to worry too much about that just yet. Alright, so side view is pretty much lined up there. I'm not going to be too careful about the slope on it yet. Like I said, I like using the belt there just because it does give us a nice cylindrical area. And then I'm going to go ahead and start extruding down. First extrude will be about halfway down towards the crotch. I can start flaring it out. Now in my case I'm not going to flare it out all the way to the edge of my art just because I know that these are metal panels that are wrapped around the legs here. So I'll just extrude it twice to get pretty much to the crotch. Flare it out again just a little bit, and right away, right, I can see the difference in the legs here. So the first thing to notice is that my geometry, right, when I move things outwards is, now I have a flare along here, but not really inside here, so that'll be something I'll need to correct. And I could just do it now with a multi-cut to start kind of up here and cut down into, say, almost the 50%, and then just near maybe 10% there. That'll give me a line going down the center. Now, you guys might have seen that the symmetry mode in Maya is not the greatest, but it should work at a very low level object like we have right here with only 2 extrudes to it. So I am going to turn on symmetry object X, now that I'm going to be making some changes to geometry. So like I said, I'm going to be looking for this kind of underwear line, and by holding shift I can choose the percentage line that I cut across the geometry. And in fact I'm going to do a cut all the way to the back here. and right click. Then I'm going to also split this cylinder straight down the center to the back. Alright, so back in face mode, I now have the start of the character, right? If I want, I can also think about, in the future, I'm definitely going to split the cylinder down center ways, but that part isn't really necessary just yet. Let's just work on getting the overall geometry for the legs and keeping it all together in one piece to see how that looks. Before I get to the legs though, I do still just have a cylinder here from the side view you can see. So in the side view, I'm going to go ahead and select a row of vertices, right? I like to work in vertex mode from this point. And just shifting them in one direction, left or right. Select the row, shift them over. Oh, that's his arm, not his tush. Alright, so from here as well, I might want to see if there's any change in thickness, right? I could always scale in or out, but I try not to get into like moving one vertex at a time just yet. That I can worry about later. I would rather just select the whole row and try and scale in or out to make things work, right? So that looks about right. Fix up the side edge to get more of an organic shape there. Okay, so I'm still in Object X symmetry, and so when I select one face, the other side will also select. Now I'm going to go to the Move tool, hold Shift to do the fast extrude method, and extrude down again. I typically want to keep these large kind of polygons about the same height. Right? I don't want to be like cutting too close, too far just yet, just because I still need to add a lot of detail, right? I don't want to get carried away with adding small details just yet, like these straps or anything like that. I want to get the big shapes in there first, make sure that those are kind of working, and then move forward. So now that I have this first section of the legs, right, I can also come back if I like. Some people work one little segment at a time for the side view and the front view, right? Other people I've seen work in large sections, right? So they'll do like the entire leg as one straight cylinder, and then they'll come into the side view. That's really a preference thing. Don't worry about if your preference is different than mine. It's no biggie at this stage. What I do want to notice though is I probably should add a little more roundness to these legs. So I'm going to select the front and back here, scale these in just to get more of a square shape for the legs. Don't want it to be too crazy of a shape just yet. Alright, so now I can continue extruding segments down, right, keeping them about the same distance apart. I'll have one segment just for the knees. I'll have to come in and add more geometry here later, but for now this will be fine. Next, I want to also start thinking about where the geometry is going to change shape, right? Obviously in this case I'm just extruding down, thinking about where the angles are going to change. So like on the calf muscle here, it juts out and then back in. Right, and then I can probably go halfway down the shin. Now again, in this case I'm just using the method where I do my extrudes first, thinking about where the plane changes are. some people, like I mentioned, will do all of their resizing along the way. So that's just a preference. So I'll do one more little cut for the ankles and then down to the bottom for the feet. Now I will start worrying about the width of this geometry, right? Could just start at the bottom maybe, but I'm going to start at the top. So I'll select the row, scale it in a little bit, move it over to match the artwork. Looks like, did I go a bit skinny on these, or am I not seeing all the geometry? It looks like because of his trousers, he's quite wide in the hips there. So scale and move. Again, I'm keeping all of these cuts perfectly horizontal. I don't want to start like moving verts around like up and down really. That's just going to make my life harder as I move forward. So I'm going to try just move along one axis at a time. Select the row, scale it down, and move it over if it needs to change directions a little bit. Right, in this case, this whole section kind of changes directions, so scale this all at once. So each time I'm just keeping an eye on the overall shape. That becomes a little bit trickier, right, when you're cutting down in the perspective view. So I like to just work with one view at a time. In this case, the front view first, and then come in and see if I can correct the side view. Again, I'm running into a bit of an issue here where the clothing is jutting out at some odd angles, right? But I don't really want to include the clothing as part of my model just yet. It's going to be easy to extrude those cloth bits later. What I really need to do is kind of use X-ray vision and guess where the actual line of the leg is here, right? So I do have to zoom out occasionally and be like, does this line actually make sense, or is it jutting all over the place? So I try to keep this center cut line all the way down the side of the leg, just like the cut on a pair of jeans, right, where your trousers are sewn together on an out seam and an inseam. So we want to actually mirror that in our geometry, where just like a piece of clothing, right, the edge is going all the way down the very side of that leg, and we haven't done that yet on the inside yet, so might be a good time to add that. Let's see if we go to Mesh Tools, see if the Insert Edge Loop is going to be a good choice for this one. Right now, since the bottom of the of this geometry, right, it's not four-sided, it's going to stop this edge loop at the foot, which is actually good for us in this case. So I'm going to look for pretty much the center, and keep an eye on the top view as well, and then that cut will also help me just make this more of an organic shape along the back of the legs. So let's check this out. Since I still have symmetry on, just do one at a time. Move this in just to create more of a cylindrical shape here, right? So it's less square, and the same thing maybe in the front. I'll skip this one because it will kind of take care of itself. Excuse me. So moving this in again just to get more of that. In this case, a hexagon shape. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides. Alright, so now I have that kind of clothing cut where I'm building the body just like if I was going to build a pair of jeans. So this part here in the very middle center will be the lowest point of the crotch. I'm not going to terribly worry about the back end just yet. So just like that though, we pretty much nailed the trouser section of this character, right? Looks like I need to jut the heel out a little bit. I kind of got distracted at the end there. For the foot, need to be a little more careful. What I'm actually going to do is extrude these faces forward to create that shape of the foot there. So I just want to set this up kind of ending in almost like a hoof shape. Then what I can do is come to the front face here and here. And oops, what did I do there? Oh, it looks like by cutting it down the center, maybe I killed my symmetry mode. So let's see if it turned that off. My extrude will work. Maybe I'll try the extrude here, Control E, and then move things forward. That gives me a little piece of geometry that I can then use. Switch over to vertex mode and reshape those. Oh, we got some terrible beefy feet going on here. So in this case right now, the front view is kind of getting in my way. Remember, I can also, if I want to select it, hold right click, choose image plane 1 and just change it to viewing through cameras. Looks like all I need to do is grab these outer vertices, squash them down. That's going to get me more of a foot shape. But obviously I need more detail in here. Looks like I just moved the ankles a little bit too wide. I guess I couldn't see them in my front view here. Let's see if I went forward. Okay, so there's my actual width of the feet. That's why it's looking a bit too chunky. So an alternate method, right, of modeling and not having to kind of delete these planes or to move the planes over is I could just create, say, a duplicate of this model and then move it to the outside, hit F to center it, right, and just pan around it to make sure that the overall shape is acceptable. Another trick that I've been using recently is the duplicate special. Under the edit menu, have Control Shift D, and I like bringing up the options here. What I might want to do here is keep the scale and everything the same and create a duplicate that will then reflect any changes that I make, right? But I'm not blocked by this front side view here, right? So I can make sort of changes along here. Suppose I could also turn the alpha up on the image plane itself, right? So again, I just selected the image plane 1, gone to the attribute editor, and I can also change how see-through that image plane is by changing the alpha gain, channel right there. It does bug out ever so slightly, right, when it has to do a transparency on top of a transparency. But now I can see, okay, like there were instances here where my vertices maybe were not quite lined up to the edge, right? So I need to scale in some of these edges here. And like I mentioned, the foot was looking way too wide. It's because I wasn't actually seeing those edge verts. I was going by the middle. Speaking of the middle, I should also watch to make sure that this now center line, right, actually goes down the middle of the leg. This kind of thing you just have to have a sense of, or actually like put your hand on your leg, especially like if you put like your pinky in, like draw a line down the very top of your leg, right, to get a sense of where the center line of the leg runs. When modeling humans, right, don't forget that we have access to all this anatomy on our own bodies. It sounds a bit goofy, but sometimes you do. You have to be like, oh, well, does my hip super jut out like that? Okay, it does have that kind of shape along this area, right? Or like, where is like the hard point where the hip changes shape into the abdominals, right? Does it have like a very high point or a very like low point? So you'll see, well, maybe not see, but you can bet that all modelers actually, all character modelers actually do this, right? Is they'll use themselves for reference, and sometimes what that means is like for doing faces, for instance, especially expressions. Um, Animators and character models will have mirrors on their desks, or they will go and film themselves to get certain shapes right, yeah, to get or to get certain movements correct. So at this stage, I'm looking for areas where maybe I need to put a little more care, but for the most part, um, this isn't too bad for a start in a character model. I can go back to the feet and give them a tiny bit more love here, just by giving them a little more geometry. Coming to my side view, scaling things down. Oops, I'm still in symmetry mode, so if I scale, it goes extra fast if I select everything at the same time. So I am having to do a little bit of vertex pushing and kind of eyeballing things just to get the foot shape right, because it is such a tricky kind of mountainous kind of shape that you have to tackle. It's not as easy as it looks. But yeah, let's just get an overall foot in there, and that's fine for now, right? So notice that since I have this instance open, right, I also just have that available to take a look at. I wonder if I change the material back to default. Yeah, that will let me have a solid object, right? Whereas here I still have my ghostly object to work from. Another thing that you can do is if you are not a fan, or if you're distracted by this low poly type of mode where you can see all the faces, to turn on soften edge under the mesh display menu. Right, that will give you more of that organic kind of look to the start of your character. So from here, again, I can see that the softness of the trousers has kind of been pulled into here. Maybe I wanted to adjust that now. But really, like, this isn't a bad start for a character model. We will have to get in here later once we start correcting things and getting into a higher poly mesh to fix areas where there's going to be deformation. Anywhere where you're going to have bends, like the knees, the ankles, and the thighs, you have to think about how these faces are going to be stretched or squashed based on the movement of these the polygons around it. So for instance, when the knee bends, right, these front two faces will end up stretching around a corner, while these back two faces, right, will compress down to kind of make that knee bend. So I'm going to take a little break, but there we have our characters' trousers and toes, right? And all in one solid airtight piece, right? We don't have any holes in this geometry yet or anything that we necessarily have to worry about. I can see here at the bottom, right, we've got this hexagonal object where we might want to just go ahead and go back to my actual object and just cut across here so that we get back into quads. So one little cut between that. Now I have quads all through my object. Right, and that's what we like because this allows us to then, as we move forward and start to insert edge loops, right, if we want to add more more detail in certain areas or more curvature in certain areas, right, having quads lets us, we got an n-gon over here or a triangle right here that we would have to mess with. But that lets us actually have edge loops that will wrap continuously around. And it isn't always the worst thing in the world to have a triangle if you want to stop an edge loop somewhere. But in this case, right, I could actually just quickly delete that. If I wanted to maintain quads here, I could just rather extend that line upwards. So now I have 4 sides, 4 sides, and 4 sides. So again, notice that that if I do go to insert edge loops, I don't have to have like made all of that detail work right from the beginning, right? I can start with this low poly mesh, and because I've used quads all the way through here, once I go to insert edge loop, it just bounces from one edge to the next, right? And it knows how to cut those things perfectly in half. That'll give you a really nice result for adding more details as you increase your face count. So this face count right now is at 183. And it's only a good spot to switch before, or take a break before we move on to the chest. So don't forget to increment and save along the way. And I'll see you guys in a bit.